The desert heat still clung to Jack Thornton's uniform even as he stood in the air-conditioned briefing room at Camp Lejeune. 8 years of service, 4 deployments, 3 Purple Hearts, and now this. Medical discharge papers sat on the gunmetal desk between him and the battalion commander. The black ink seeming to bleed into the white paper like a wound that wouldn't close. Captain Thornton, the commander had said, his voice carrying that particular weight of a man delivering news he'd rather not. You've served with distinction, no one questions that. But the medical board is clear. The shrapnel in your shoulder, the PTSD diagnosis, these aren't suggestions. You're done. Jack had stood there, 28 years old, feeling like the ground beneath his boots was crumbling. Done. As if a man could just be done at 28. As if 8 years of brotherhood, of missions, of purpose could just end with a signature and a handshake. He'd saluted one last time, feeling the pull in his right shoulder where the metal fragments from the Ramadi IED still lived under his skin, small reminders of the day 3 of his Marines hadn't made it home. The barracks had felt empty as he'd packed his duffel. The younger Marines had watched him with something between respect and fear, as if medical discharge was contagious, as if they too might suddenly find themselves on the wrong side of a form letter. Jackson Thornton, who'd survived Fallujah and Sangin, brought down not by enemy fire but by the invisible wounds the brass didn't know how to handle. His phone had buzzed as he'd folded his last uniform. Unknown number, North Carolina area code. He'd almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail like he'd done with every call from his father for the past 10 years. But something made him answer. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the particular emptiness of that moment. The voice on the other end was gravel and whiskey, rough in the way only decades of outdoor work and cigarettes could make a man sound. Jack. It's Bear, Samuel Maddox. You remember me? The name hit him like a fastball to the chest. Bear. Of course he remembered. The ranch foreman who'd taught him to ride when he was 8 years old, who'd shown him how to read a horse's eyes, who'd told him stories about Vietnam while they'd mucked stalls in the California summer heat. Bear, who'd lost his left leg below the knee to a landmine outside Khe Sanh and never once complained about it. I remember, Jack had said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. The colonel's gone, son. Bear's voice had carried an ocean of grief, or grief in those 4 words. Heart attack, 3 days ago. I'm sorry to tell you this way, but there wasn't time for a letter. Jack had sat down hard on his footlocker, the phone pressed to his ear. Grandpa Robert. Colonel Robert Thornton, Army Ranger, Silver Star recipient, the only man in Jack's family who'd understood why an 18-year-old kid would choose the Marines over a college trust fund. The man who'd taught him that legacy wasn't about money, it was about what you were willing to bleed for. He left you everything, Bear continued. Willowbrook, all of it. But Jack, you need to know something else. Your father's already circling. He's got lawyers. This is going to be a fight. Jack had looked down at his discharge papers, at the duffel bag containing everything he owned in the world, at the 8 years of service that were ending, whether he was ready or not. A fight. That was something he understood. That was something the Marines had trained him for, even if the enemy this time wore a suit instead of fatigues. When's the funeral, he'd asked. 3 days. San Luis Obispo. Bear's voice had softened. Your grandfather talked about you every day, Jack. Every single day. He never stopped hoping you'd come home. Jack had closed his eyes, remembering the last time he'd seen the colonel. 10 years ago, the night before he'd shipped out to boot camp. His father Richard had been screaming, calling him a traitor to the family, saying he was running away from responsibility. And Robert had simply put a hand on Jack's shoulder and said, some men talk about honor. Others live it. Come back safe, Marine. Safe. I'm coming, Jack had told Bear, and I'm coming ready. The drive from North Carolina to California took 3 days. Jack could have flown, could have been there in 6 hours, but something in him needed the miles, needed the time to process. He'd rented an F-150 from a lot off base, loaded his duffel in the back, and pointed west. Interstate 40 stretched out before him like a ribbon of asphalt through the heart of America, through the South and into Texas, through the endless plains of New Mexico and Arizona, and finally into California. He drove with the windows down, letting the wind scour away the last traces of military life. NPR played softly on the radio, news about the economy, about housing prices, about a world that had kept turning while he'd been overseas. He stopped at truck stops and diners, sat at counters next to long-haul drivers and retirees, drank coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Bush administration. Nobody knew him here. Nobody saluted. He was just another man in a Ford, heading somewhere, leaving somewhere else behind. His phone buzzed periodically. Texts from his father that he deleted without reading. 2 calls from someone named Philip Hartwell, attorney at law. 1 voicemail from his mother that he played once, her voice tight with that particular strain of forced sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Jackie, honey, we need to talk about your grandfather's estate. There are complications. Call me back." Jackie. She was the only person who still called him that, and she only did it when she was trying to manipulate him. He deleted the voicemail. The landscape changed as he drove, from the green of the Carolinas to the red earth of Oklahoma, from the high desert of New Mexico to the mountains of Arizona. He thought about the Colonel, about summers at Willowbrook when he'd been a kid, before his parents had moved them to Seattle, before the arguments, before the family had fractured along lines that had seemed impossible to cross. He remembered being 9 years old, sitting on the top rail of the corral fence while Robert worked with a young stallion. The horse had been skittish, all nervous energy and rolling eyes, and Jack had asked his grandfather why he didn't just use a whip to make it behave. Robert had looked at him with those steel gray eyes and said, "Because fear and respect aren't the same thing, Jack. Any fool can make something afraid. It takes a real man to earn trust. Remember that. It'll serve you better than any lesson you'll learn in a classroom." Jack had remembered. In the Marines, he'd been the officer his men trusted, not the one they feared. It had made the difference more times than he could count. It had saved lives, and it had cost him too, in the kind of ways that didn't show up on medical reports, in the weight of decisions made in split seconds, in the faces of men he couldn't save no matter how much trust they'd placed in him. Somewhere in Arizona, he stopped at a rest area and called Philip Hartwell back. The attorney answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular confidence of a man used to being the smartest person in the room. "Captain Thornton, I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I was driving," Jack said. "What do you need to tell me that Bear hasn't already?" "Plenty, but not over the phone. When will you be in San Luis Obispo?" "Tomorrow afternoon." "Good. My office is on Higuera Street downtown. I'll have my assistant email you the address. There are things you need to know before the funeral, and especially before you see your father." Jack leaned against the truck, watching the desert sun paint the sky orange and purple. "What kind of things?" "The kind that explain why your grandfather spent the last 5 years of his life preparing for war." Hartwell paused. "Jack, your father has been planning this for a long time. Robert knew it. That's why he documented everything. Everything, but you need to see it to believe it." After the call ended, Jack stood there in the Arizona heat, watching families pile out of minivans, watching retirees walk their dogs in the designated pet area, watching America go about its ordinary evening. And he thought about his father, about Richard Thornton, who'd never served a day in uniform, who'd never built anything that lasted, who'd spent his entire life resenting the man who'd given him everything. The fight Bear had warned him about wasn't coming. It was already here. It had probably started years ago, while Jack had been overseas, while he'd been focused on keeping his Marines alive. His father had been laying siege to the Colonel's legacy, and Robert had been defending it alone. Not anymore. Jack got back in the truck and drove into the night, the headlights cutting through darkness, the white lines of the highway disappearing under his wheels like time itself, bringing him closer to a confrontation a decade in the making. He crossed into California as the sun rose, the golden light spilling over the mountains like liquid honey. The landscape here was different from what he remembered, dried by drought, the hills the color of wheat instead of the green he'd known as a child. But as he drove deeper into San Luis Obispo County, following the GPS through winding roads, something shifted. The land turned green again, watered by springs and careful management, and suddenly he was seeing fence lines he recognized, oak trees that had shaded him as a boy. And then there it was. The main gate of Willowbrook Ranch, the wooden arch overhead with letters burned deep into the oak. Willowbrook Ranch is established 1968, his grandfather's year of discharge from active duty, the year he'd bought this land with his Army pension and his father's small inheritance and turned 500 acres of California scrubland into something that mattered. Jack pulled off the road and sat there, engine idling, looking at that gate. 56 years of work, 2 generations of breeding excellence, $1.47 billion of value, according to what little he'd managed to learn online is so. But more than that, so much more. This was legacy made tangible, commitment poured into soil and stone, and bloodlines that stretched back centuries. His phone buzzed. A text from Bear. "I see you on the security camera. Come on up to the main house. Philip's already here." Jack put the truck in gear and drove through the gate onto property that was apparently his now, though it felt more like trespassing. The road curved through pastures where horses grazed in the morning sun, Arabians and thoroughbreds that even his untrained eye could recognize as exceptional. The main house appeared around a bend, a sprawling colonial structure that had been added onto over decades. White columns and wraparound porches, solar panels on the roof that hadn't been there 10 years ago. Bear was waiting on the porch, and the sight of him made Jack's throat tight. The old man had aged, his beard more gray than black now, his face more lined. But he stood straight, no sign of favoring the prosthetic leg, and when Jack got out of the truck, Bear came down the steps and pulled him into a hug that smelled like leather and hay and coffee. "Welcome home, Marine," Bear said quietly. Jack couldn't speak for a moment, just stood there in the embrace of a man who'd been more of a father to him than his own ever had. When they finally separated, Bear held him at arm's length, studying him the way a master sergeant studies a private. "You look like hell," he said. "Medical discharge." Jack managed a small smile. "Turns out Uncle Sam doesn't need broken toys. Nothing broken about you that time won't heal." Bear's voice carried absolute certainty. The colonel knew that. That's why he left you everything. Not despite your wounds, but because of them. He said only a man who'd sacrificed something real would understand what Willowbrook actually meant. They walked up to the house together, Bear's prosthetic making a subtle clicking sound on the wooden porch steps. Inside, the house was exactly as Jack remembered and completely different. The furniture was the same, worn leather and solid oak, but there were new photos on the walls, new technology mixed with the old, a laptop on the desk where the colonel's typewriter used to sit. Philip Hartwell was waiting in the study, standing by the window that overlooked the training paddocks. He was 66, Bear had told Jack, but looked 50s, trim and military straight in his bearing. West Point class of 79, served with Robert in the early 80s, left the service as a captain to get his law degree. The kind of man who'd traded one uniform for another. "Captain Thornton," Hartwell said, extending his hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." They shook, and Jack felt the firm grip of a man who still did push-ups every morning. "Just Jack now. I'm not active duty anymore." "Once a Marine, always a Marine," Hartwell gestured to the leather chairs arranged around the colonel's massive oak desk. "Sit. We have a lot to cover and not much time. Your father will be here in about 3 hours, whether we invite him or not." Jack sat, and Bear settled into the chair next to him, a show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. Hartwell opened a leather portfolio and pulled out documents that looked like they'd been prepared by someone expecting a war. "Your grandfather's estate is substantial," Hartwell began. 5,200 acres of prime California coastal land, currently valued at approximately $680 million. That's just the land. The livestock, bloodlines, and genetic rights are valued at $420 million. Infrastructure, facilities, equipment, another $190 million. And then there are the investments, cash reserves, and intellectual property. Total estate value, $1.47 billion. The numbers were so large, they almost didn't mean anything. Jack had grown up middle class, had lived on a captain's salary for 8 years. Billion with a B wasn't a concept he could actually process. "The ranch generates approximately $62 million in annual gross revenue," Hartwell continued. "Net profit after all expenses, operating costs, salaries, maintenance, insurance, everything. Approximately $18 million per year. Your grandfather ran a lean operation. No debt, no leveraging, everything paid in cash." Jack looked at Bear. "How is that possible? Ranches this size carry debt." "Because the colonel was stubborn and patient," Bear said. "He built slow. Every expansion, every facility, every investment. He paid for it in full before moving to the next thing. Took him 50 years to build what others might have leveraged together in 20. But it meant nobody owned a piece of him. Nobody had leverage." "Smart," Jack said. Also incredibly disciplined. That's the Colonel, Bear agreed. Everything was about long-term vision, not quarterly profits, not fast money, building something that would last generations. Hartwell pulled out another document, and his expression darkened. Now the bad news. Your grandfather's will leaves everything to you. The entire estate, complete control, no strings attached, except one provision, the performance clause. Jack felt his stomach tighten. What kind of performance clause? You must maintain the ranch's profitability for 24 consecutive months, Hartwell said. If at any point during those 24 months, the ranch operates at a loss, or if financial performance drops below certain specific benchmarks outlined in the will, controlling interest in the estate reverts to the next living heir. That would be your father. Jack stared at him. So I inherit $1.4 billion, but only if I can prove I'm not an idiot for 2 years? More or less, Bear said. The Colonel wanted to make sure you were committed. He didn't want you to inherit out of obligation and then sell to the first bidder. This way you have to engage. You have to learn. You have to give a damn. What are the specific benchmarks, Jack asked. Annual net profit cannot drop below $15 million, Hartwell said. That gives you some cushion from the current $18 million. Livestock mortality cannot exceed industry standards. No major scandals, regulatory violations, or legal judgments that materially impact operations. And you must maintain at least 80% of current staff retention. That last one surprised Jack. Staff retention. The Colonel was big on taking care of people, Bear explained. He knew that ranches live and die by the people who work them. If you're bleeding staff, it means you're doing something wrong. So he built it into the will. Jack leaned back, processing. So for 2 years, I'm essentially on probation. If I screw up, my father gets everything. Exactly, Hartwell said. And Jack, you need to understand something. Your father has been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Robert knew it. That's why he spent the last 5 years documenting everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every threat. It's all on here. Hartwell pulled out a USB drive, small and black, innocuous looking. This drive contains 20 years of security footage, audio recordings, financial records, correspondence, and legal documents. Your grandfather was methodical. He knew that when he died, your father would contest the will. So he built an evidence file that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. What's on it? Jack asked. Proof, Bear said quietly. Proof of everything Richard Thornton has done to try to get his hands on this ranch. Proof of the lies, the manipulation, the schemes. Proof that he's exactly the kind of man who should never be allowed anywhere near a legacy like this. Jack took the USB drive, feeling the weight of it, literal and metaphorical. Have you listened to the recordings? All of them, Hartwell said. And Jack, I'm going to be straight with you. Some of it is going to hurt. Your father says things about you, about your service, about your grandfather, things that will make you angry, but you need to hear them. You need to know exactly what you're dealing with. Before Jack could respond, before he could ask what specifically his father had said, there was a sound outside. The crunch of tires on gravel, multiple vehicles. Bear moved to the window and cursed under his breath. He's early. 3 cars. Mercedes. Looks like he brought the whole legal team. Jack stood, his Marine training kicking in automatically. Contact in 3 minutes. What's our posture? Hartwell smiled grimly. Defensive. We listen. We don't reveal the USB drive. We let them make their demands. We document everything. And we give them absolutely nothing. Roger that, Jack said and moved to the window. Outside, 3 black Mercedes had pulled up in front of the main house. From the first car emerged Richard Thornton, and Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. His father had aged more than Bear had. The hair was thinner, grayer, the middle had spread. But the expression was the same. That particular blend of arrogance and entitlement that Jack remembered from every argument they had ever had. From the second car came Catherine Thornton, Jack's mother, still beautiful in the way that required extensive maintenance, her blonde hair perfect, her clothes designer labels, her face carefully composed. She looked up at the house like she was evaluating real estate, not the home where her son's grandfather had died 3 days ago. The third car disgorged 3 people in expensive suits, lawyers clearly, carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. 2 men flanking a woman with silver hair and a face that radiated courtroom confidence. Here we go, Bear said quietly. Jack watched his parents approach the house, watched the lawyers fan out behind them like attendants behind royalty, and he thought about the colonel's letter that Hartwell had showed him earlier. If you're reading this, you survived the initial assault. Now comes the real war. Don't fight with emotion, Jack. Fight with facts. Facts are bullets. Emotion is just noise. The doorbell rang, formal and intrusive. Hartwell looked at Jack. You ready for this? Jack thought about Ramadi, about leading patrols through streets where every doorway could hide death, about making decisions where hesitation cost lives. He thought about the Marines he'd lost, the ones whose names he carried like stones in his chest. He thought about 8 years of service ending with discharge papers and a medical diagnosis. And then he thought about his grandfather, about a man who jumped into Grenada with Hartwell, who'd built something meaningful out of dirt and determination, who'd believed his grandson was worth investing in even when everyone else had written him off. Born ready, Jack said and opened the door. Richard Thornton stood on the porch, flanked by lawyers and wife, and his smile was the kind salesmen use before delivering bad news. Jackie, look at you, still playing soldier. Jack didn't move, didn't step aside, didn't invite them in. The name's Jack, and I stopped playing the day I enlisted. What do you want, Richard? His father's smile tightened at the use of his first name, at the refusal to acknowledge him as anything more than a man standing on someone else's property. We need to talk. Family business. There's nothing to talk about. The will is clear. The colonel left everything to me. Catherine stepped forward, her heels clicking on the wooden porch. Sweetie, we just want what's fair. Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind at the end. He was elderly, confused, and frankly, I think he was being manipulated by certain people. She glanced past Jack toward Bear, and Jack felt anger surge hot and sudden. Bear had served this country, had lost a leg for it, had spent 40 years helping build Willowbrook into what it was. And Catherine Thornton, who'd never sacrificed anything for anyone, was implying he was some kind of con artist. Get off this property, Jack said, his voice quiet but carrying that particular tone officers used when there was no room for argument. All of you, now. One of the lawyers stepped forward, the silver-haired woman whose bearing suggested she'd won more cases than she'd lost. I'm Eleanor Mercer, representing Richard and Catherine Thornton. Captain Thornton, we're prepared to offer a very generous settlement. $5 million cash, paid immediately in exchange for your signature relinquishing all claims to the estate. Jack laughed, the sound harsh in the morning air. You're offering me $5 million for a $1.4 billion estate. That's not a settlement. That's an insult. It's more money than someone in your position would ever see otherwise, Mercer said smoothly. Someone with no business experience, no education in ranch management, no understanding of the complexities involved. You'd be set for life. Your parents would take on the burden of managing this operation. Everyone wins. Except everyone doesn't win, Hartwell said, stepping out onto the porch beside Jack. Everyone except the people who actually built this place. The staff who've dedicated their lives to it. The legacy that Robert Thornton spent 50 years creating. Your clients aren't interested in stewardship. They're interested in liquidation. That's not true, Richard said, but his voice carried the particular falseness of a man reading lines. We want to preserve Dad's legacy. We just think Jack isn't equipped to handle it. Hell, look at him. He's a combat veteran with PTSD. Is that really the person we want making billion-dollar decisions? Jack felt Bear tense beside him, felt Hartwell's hands subtly signal caution, and he realized his father was already building the narrative, already laying groundwork for the legal challenge. Incompetent heir, mentally unstable, unfit to manage a state. It was a strategy, calculated and cruel. My medical discharge, Jack said slowly, doesn't affect my legal rights. It doesn't affect my competence. And it sure as hell doesn't give you standing to contest a will that was legally executed by a man of sound mind. We'll let a judge decide that, Mercer said. We're prepared to file a motion to freeze all estate assets pending psychiatric evaluation of Robert Thornton's mental state at the time of writing the will. He's been dead 3 days, and you're already calling him crazy, Jack said. That's a new low, even for you. Richard's face flushed. Don't you dare judge me. I'm his son. I'm his blood. You're just a grandson who couldn't even be bothered to visit in 10 years. The words hit harder than Jack expected, finding the guilt he carried, the knowledge that he'd let the Marines and his father's poisonous influence keep him from the one man who'd actually believed in him. But he didn't let it show. Marines didn't show pain. They adapted and overcame. "This conversation's over," Jack said. "Get in your cars, drive away. And the next time you want to talk, do it through lawyers, because you're not welcome on this property." "We'll see what a judge says about that," Catherine said, her voice cold. They turned and walked back to their cases, the lawyers conferring in low voices, Richard's shoulders tight with fury. Jack watched them drive away, the Mercedes kicking up dust, and he felt the weight of what was coming settle on him like body armor. When the cars disappeared from sight, Jack turned to Hartwell. "How bad is this going to get?" "Bad," Hartwell said. "They'll file within 48 hours. Motion to freeze assets, motion to contest the will, probably a motion to remove you as executor pending psychiatric review. It's going to be expensive, ugly, and public." "Let them come," Jack said. "I've faced worse." "Have you, though?" Bear asked quietly. "Because combat's clean, Jack. You know who the enemy is. You know the rules. This is going to be your own father trying to destroy you. That's a different kind of warfare." Jack looked out at Willowbrook, at the pastures and stables and the horses moving in the morning sun, at 56 years of work made manifest in dirt and dedication. He thought about the colonel's letter, about the performance clause, about 24 months to prove he deserved this. "Then it's time I learned a new kind of warfare," Jack said. "Show me the ranch. Show me what I'm fighting for. And then show me those recordings. I need to know exactly who my enemy is." The three men walked down from the porch, heading toward the stables, and Jack felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but purpose, direction, the kind of clarity that came when the mission was finally defined. He was home, and this time he wasn't running from anything. He was running towards something worth defending, something his grandfather had built, something that mattered more than money. Legacy. And nobody, not his father, not lawyers, not his own doubts, was going to take that away without the fight of their lives. The stables at Willowbrook smelled like Jack remembered. Hay and leather and horse sweat, clean sweat, the kind that came from animals bred for excellence and treated with care. Bear led him through the main facility, past stalls where Arabians watched with intelligent dark eyes, past grooming stations where ranch hands worked with the quiet efficiency of people who knew their craft. "This is the heart of it," Bear said, his prosthetic leg clicking softly on the concrete floor. 180 head. Best bloodlines in North America, some would argue the world. Your grandfather spent 50 years developing these genetics. Every horse here represents decisions made across 6 generations. Jack stopped at a stall where a black stallion stood, muscles rippling under glossy coat, the animal radiating power even at rest. The nameplate read Warlord's Pride. "That's our crown jewel," Bear continued. 7 years old, valued at $3.2 million. He's sired 14 Grade 1 winners. His stud fee is $250,000 per cover. We book him 60 times a season. You do the math. 15 million, Jack said quietly. From one horse. From one horse's genetics. From 50 years of selective breeding. From understanding that excellence compounds over time. Bear ran a hand along the stall door. The colonel used to say that patience was the only edge that mattered. Everyone else in this business wants fast money. Robert wanted lasting legacy. A man approached from the far end of the stable, moving with the bow-legged gait of someone who'd spent decades in saddles. He was 50s, weathered face, calloused hands, eyes that assessed Jack with the cool judgment of a master evaluating an apprentice. "Hank Cordova," Bear said, head trainer, 30 years with the colonel. "Hank, this is Jack." Hank extended a hand, the grip firm and testing. "Heard a lot about you. Marines, right?" 8 years, Jack said. "The colonel talked about you like you walked on water." Hank's expression was neutral. "Hope you live up to it. This place doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on knowledge and sweat. You got those?" "I've got the sweat part down," Jack said. "The knowledge, I'm here to learn." Something shifted in Hank's face, a slight relaxation. "Good answer. Most people walk in here thinking they already know everything because they inherited money. Come on, let me show you what you actually own." The tour took 3 hours. Hank walked Jack through every aspect of the operation with the methodical precision of a man who understood that details mattered. The breeding barn, where artificial insemination happened with scientific precision, timing calculated down to the hour based on mare estrus cycles. The foaling barn, where pregnant mares were monitored 24/7, where veterinary equipment that looked like it belonged in a human hospital stood ready for complications. We run 40 breeding cycles a year, Hank explained. Industry average success rate is 62%. Ours is 78%. You know why? Because we don't cut corners. We don't rush. We wait for optimal conditions. And when we breed right. They visited the training facilities, the covered arena where young horses learn to accept saddle and rider, the outdoor track where thoroughbreds stretch their legs in morning workouts. Jack watched a 2-year-old colt move through its paces, the animal's stride powerful and smooth, and even with his untrained eye, he could see the potential. That's Midnight Sun, Hank said. By Warlord's Pride out of Evening Star. Could be worth $2 million by the time he's 5 if he races well. Could be worth $10 million if he sires champions. Or he could blow out a tendon tomorrow and be worth nothing. That's the business. High risk, high reward, and you better have the stomach for both. The business office occupied a converted barn, climate-controlled and equipped with technology that would have impressed a Silicon Valley startup. 6 people worked here full-time. Bloodstock agents who negotiated breeding contracts, accountants who tracked every dollar, legal staff who managed the complex web of contracts and agreements that kept a billion-dollar operation running. Amanda Chen, the chief financial officer, was 45 and Stanford educated, wearing a blazer over ranch practical clothes, her handshake brief and professional. She spread financial statements across a conference table like a general laying out battle plans. Annual gross revenue, $62 million, she said without preamble. Breakdown, $35 million from stud fees, $18 million from horse sales, $9 million from training contracts and miscellaneous. Operating expenses, $31 million. Staff salaries and benefits, $12 million. Feed, veterinary, maintenance, $8 million. Insurance, $4 million. Property taxes and regulatory, $3 million. Utilities, transportation, marketing, the rest. Net profit, $18 million annually. Jack studied the numbers, his mind automatically running calculations. That's a 29% profit margin. Is that good for this industry? It's exceptional, Amanda said. Most operations run 10 to 15%. Your grandfather achieved this through vertical integration and refusing to carry debt. We own our feed suppliers. We handle our own veterinary care. We maintain our own equipment. Every dollar that would normally go to outside contractors stays in-house. What's our biggest vulnerability? Jack asked. Amanda's expression sharpened with what might have been approval. Drought. 1 bad year of grass growth, and we're spending $4 million extra on feed. Also, injury to key stallions. Warlord's Pride goes down, we lose 25% of revenue overnight. That's why insurance is so high. But insurance only covers asset value, not future earnings potential. So we're vulnerable to acts of God and bad luck, Jack said. Welcome to ranching, Hank said from the doorway. It's not for people who need guarantees. That first week, Jack insisted on starting at the bottom. He showed up at 4 in the morning when the ranch hands began their day, mucking stalls and hauling feed, learning the rhythm of work that made everything else possible. The men watched him with skepticism at first. This Marine who'd inherited billions, this grandson playing at being a working man. But Jack had learned in the Corps that respect wasn't given. It was earned through shared misery. He worked harder than anyone, never complained, never pulled rank. By the end of the week, the jokes started, the kind of rough humor that meant acceptance. By the end of the second week, Diego, a 30-something former ranch hand who'd worked his way up to assistant trainer, pulled him aside. You're not like your father, Diego said. It wasn't a question. I try not to be. Good. Because your father came here once, maybe 10 years ago, demanded the colonel sell him a stallion for half price, family discount. When the colonel said no, your father threatened to contest the ownership papers. Called us all hired help, said we should remember our place. Diego's eyes were hard. The colonel threw him off the property. Told him never to come back. We all wondered if you'd be the same. I'm not, Jack said. Prove it, Diego replied, every day. Because words are cheap. Work is what matters. Jack proved it. He learned to read a horse's body language, the subtle signs of discomfort or illness that could mean the difference between a minor issue and a catastrophic injury. He learned the science of bloodlines, studying pedigree charts that went back generations, learning to recognize the genetic markers that produce champions. He learned the art of patience, Understanding that breeding excellence was a marathon measured in decades, not quarters, Hank became his primary teacher, gruff and demanding but fair. They would stand in the early morning light, watching horses move through their exercises, and Hank would explain what to look for: the angle of the shoulder, the length of stride, the way weight transferred through the legs. The difference between a horse that looked fast and a horse that was structurally sound enough to stay fast over time. "Your grandfather had a gift," Hank said one morning. "He could look at a yearling and see what it would become. Not just physically, temperament, heart, the thing that makes a horse want to win. You can't teach that. You either see it or you don't." "Do I see it?" Jack asked. "Too early to tell. But you're willing to learn, and that's half the battle." Hank glanced at him. "The other half is being willing to make hard decisions, knowing when to breed and when to wait, when to sell and when to hold, when to put down an animal that's suffering, even when it's worth millions." The hard decision came sooner than Jack expected. 3 weeks into his tenure, Bear pounded on his door at 2 a.m, his face grim in the porch light. "We got a problem. Midnight Ranger is colicking. It's bad." Jack dressed in 30 seconds, military speed, and followed Bear to the veterinary barn. Dr. Marcus Webb was already there, a 45-year-old veterinarian who'd worked rodeo before settling into breeding operations. His hands steady as he examined the 4-year-old stallion worth $1.8 million. Midnight Ranger stood in the examination stall, his sides heaving, sweat darkening his coat. His eyes rolled white with pain. The monitors showed heart rate and respiration elevated, intestinal sounds absent. Webb worked quickly, running an ultrasound over the stallion's abdomen, his expression darkening. "Twisted intestine," Webb said without looking up. "Large colon, about 360-degree torsion. We need to operate now or we lose him." "What are the odds?" Jack asked. 50-50, Webb said flatly. "Even if the surgery goes well, recovery is 6 months minimum. No breeding this season. The insurance covers $1 million if he dies. But if he lives, his breeding potential over his lifetime is worth maybe $10 million. "What do you need from me?" Jack asked. Webb looked up, surprised. "You're the owner. I need your decision. Operate or euthanize." The choice was clear to Jack, even if the numbers weren't. Operate, do whatever it takes. "It's going to cost $200,000 in surgical fees and recovery. You sure?" "I'm sure. Save him." The surgery took 4 hours. Jack stayed the entire time watching through the observation window as Webb and his team worked with the kind of focused intensity Jack recognized from combat medics. The intestine had to be untwisted, checked for necrosis, resected where tissue had died. It was delicate work, life balanced on the edge of a scalpel. Jack's military medical training, basic though it was, helped him understand what was happening. The careful placement of clamps, the methodical checking of blood flow, the decision-making in real time as conditions changed. Webb was a master surgeon, and watching him work, Jack understood why the colonel had paid him $250,000 a year. When Midnight Ranger finally came out of anesthesia, when his vitals stabilized and Webb allowed himself a small smile, Jack felt something unclench in his chest. The stallion would live. It would cost them $1.2 million in lost breeding fees for the season, not to mention the surgical costs. But they'd saved a life, saved a bloodline, made the choice that prioritized long-term legacy over short-term profit. "That was the right call," Bear said quietly, standing beside Jack as they watched the stallion rest, monitors beeping steadily. "But it's going to hurt the books." "Some things matter more than the books," Jack said. "The colonel would have said the same thing." Bear nodded slowly. "But the board's not going to like it. And your father's lawyers are going to use this as evidence you don't know what you're doing." "Let them try," Jack said. The board meeting happened 3 days later. 8 men, all between 55 and 75, all friends or associates of the colonel, all watching Jack with varying degrees of skepticism. They sat around a massive table in the ranch's conference room, financial reports spread before them, the numbers telling a story they didn't like. Harold Cross, the board chairman and a 68-year-old rancher who'd known Robert since the 70s, opened the meeting with characteristic bluntness. "Jack, we appreciate your instinct to save Midnight Ranger, but the financial impact is significant. $1.2 million in lost revenue this season, plus surgical costs, plus recovery expenses. That's a substantial hit to the profit margin." Jack met his gaze steadily. "What's the alternative? Let a 4-year-old stallion die because of a balance sheet?" There's insurance, another board member said. 1 million payout. Cut our losses. Invest in breeding contracts with other operations. And abandon a bloodline the colonel spent 15 years developing? Jack shook his head. That's short-term thinking. With respect, Harold said, and Jack heard the but coming before it arrived, you've been here 3 weeks. We've been doing this for 30 years. Sometimes the hard business decision is the right decision. And sometimes the hard business decision is the coward's way out, Jack said. His voice stayed level, but he felt the Marine officer in him emerging, the man who'd led troops in firefights and made life-or-death calls under pressure. I understand P&L, I understand risk management, but I also understand that legacy isn't built by taking the easy way out every time something gets expensive. The room went quiet. Amanda Chen, the CFO, broke the silence. For what it's worth, I ran the long-term projections. If Midnight Ranger recovers fully, his lifetime earnings potential is between 8 and 12 million. The insurance payout is 1 million. From a pure financial standpoint, Jack made the correct call. Assuming he recovers fully, Harold said. He will, Jack said with more confidence than he felt. Harold studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but we're going to need to make some adjustments to offset the loss. We can't have another hit like this without jeopardizing the performance clause in your grandfather's will. What kind of adjustments, Jack asked. Amanda opened a spreadsheet. We can reduce operating costs by 8% through efficiency measures. We can accelerate the sale of 6 younger horses currently in development, generate approximately 1.5 million in immediate capital, and we can renegotiate our insurance coverage to get better disability protection on key assets. Do it, Jack said. All of it. What else? We hold steady, Bears said from his position at the end of the table. We don't panic. We don't make desperate moves. We trust the foundation the colonel built. The meeting ended with grudging acceptance, but Jack could feel the doubt. These men had trusted Robert Thornton because he'd earned their trust over decades. Jack was an unknown quantity, a 28-year-old Marine with no business experience, asking them to believe in instinct over actuarial tables. After the meeting, Harold pulled him aside. Your grandfather was the best man I ever knew, but he was also stubborn to a fault. Sometimes his stubbornness paid off. Sometimes it cost him. You've got the same stubborn streak. Let's hope it's the paying off kind. Jack walked back to the main house as the sun set, painting the California hills gold and orange. He thought about the colonel, about a man who'd built excellence through patience and principle. He thought about his father, who'd probably already heard about the board meeting, who was probably already preparing to use the Midnight Ranger situation as ammunition. His phone buzzed. A text from Philip Hartwell. Your father filed this morning, motion to freeze assets, motion to contest will, motion for psychiatric evaluation of Robert at time of writing, and a motion to remove you as executor based on incompetence. Hearing in 2 weeks. Call me. Jack stood there, the fading light, looking out at Willowbrook, at the stables and pastures and the physical manifestation of his grandfather's life work. 2 weeks. The legal assault was coming faster than he'd expected. He called Hartwell back. The attorney answered immediately, his voice carrying tension. They're coming hard and fast. Clayton Mercer is good, and he's playing the media angle. Local news already has the story. Grandson with PTSD inherits billions, makes questionable business decisions. What's our counter? Truth, Hartwell said. We have the USB drive, we have recordings, we have documentation. But Jack, once we use that, there's no going back. It will destroy your relationship with your parents permanently. That relationship was destroyed a long time ago, Jack said. Use whatever you need to use. Not yet. Not until we absolutely have to. First, we fight the competency angle. I've got 3 psychiatrists who will testify you're perfectly capable. I've got your service record, which is impeccable. I've got testimonials from Bear, from Hank, from the board. We make them prove their case first. And if that's not enough, then we go nuclear, Hartwell said quietly. Then we show the world exactly who Richard Thornton is. That night, Jack sat in the colonel's study, surrounded by books about breeding and genetics, by photos of championship horses and military commendations. He opened the laptop and pulled up the financial projections Amanda had shown him. The numbers were tight, with Midnight Ranger out of commission, with legal fees mounting, with the constant pressure of the performance clause. There was very little margin for error. He thought about walking away, about taking the $5 million his father had offered. about going back to a simpler life where the stakes weren't measured in billions in legacy. It would be easier. It would be safer. But easier and safer weren't values the Marines had taught him, and they weren't values the colonel had lived by. Jack pulled out the USB drive Hartwell had given him, the one with 20 years of recordings. He'd been avoiding it, not ready to hear what his father had said, what poison had been captured on those files. But if he was going to fight this war, he needed to know the enemy completely. He plugged it in and opened the first folder. The files were organized by date, hundreds of them, audio and video both. He clicked on one from 5 years ago, video from a security camera in the colonel's study. The image showed his grandfather at the desk, older than Jack remembered, and Richard Thornton standing across from him. The audio came through clearly. "Dad, you're being unreasonable." Richard's voice carried the whine of a man used to not getting his way. "We're family. You owe us. I don't owe you anything I haven't already given." The colonel's voice was tired. "I gave you a good childhood. I paid for your education. I bailed you out of 7 failed businesses. At some point, you have to stand on your own. This ranch should come to me. I'm your son, and Jack is my grandson. The one who served his country, the one who understands sacrifice. You've never sacrificed anything in your life, Richard. That's not fair." "Fair? Let me tell you about fair. Fair is watching your friends die in Grenada. Fair is building a business from nothing over 50 years. Fair is not demanding your father hand you his life's work because you're too lazy to build your own." The video showed Richard's face flushed with anger. "You're going to regret this. When you're gone, we'll take everything, and there's nothing you can do about it." "I'm already doing something about it," the colonel said quietly. "I'm documenting every conversation we have, every threat, every demand, and when I'm gone, Jack will have all the ammunition he needs to fight you." Richard had leaned across the desk, his voice dropping to something ugly. "Jackie won't fight. He's too soft. He hates conflict. We'll crush him in court." The colonel had smiled, cold and certain. "You don't know him at all. That boy has more steel in him than you ever did. And when he comes home, when he understands what's at stake, he won't just fight you. He'll destroy you." Jack stopped the video, his hands shaking. To hear his father talk about him like that, to hear the calculation and contempt, it hurt in ways he hadn't expected. But it also clarified things. This wasn't about money. It was about 2 fundamentally different views of the world. His father saw people as obstacles or resources. The colonel had seen them as individuals worthy of respect and investment. Jack knew which worldview he believed in, and he knew which one he would fight for. He spent the rest of the night going through the recordings. There were dozens of them, years of documentation. Richard demanding money, Catherine complaining that the colonel was selfish, threats, both subtle and explicit. The restraining order Richard had filed in 2014, claiming the colonel was financially abusing him, when the truth was that Robert had simply refused to fund another failed business venture. But the worst was a recording from just 6 months before the colonel's death. Richard on the phone, not knowing the study was wired for sound. "I talked to that doctor. For $50,000, he'll testify Dad had dementia. We just need him to die soon." Jack closed the laptop, feeling sick. His father had been willing to bribe medical professionals to lie about the colonel's mental state, had been actively hoping for his own father's death. This wasn't just greed, it was something darker, something that had twisted Richard Thornton into a man who could look at his dying father and see only a balance sheet. A knock on the study door. Bear stood there, 2 glasses of bourbon in hand. "Figured you might need this." Jack took the glass gratefully. "You knew about the recordings?" "All of it." Bear settled into the other chair. "The colonel didn't want to burden you with it while you were overseas. Figured you had enough to deal with. But he wanted you prepared for what would come after. I'm not sure anything could prepare me for this. Maybe not. But you're here, you're fighting, that's what matters." Bear raised his glass. "To the colonel, and to not becoming our fathers." They drank in silence, the bourbon burning smooth down Jack's throat. Outside, the California night was clear, stars visible in a way they never were in cities. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. "How bad is the legal fight gonna get?" Jack asked. "Worse than you're imagining," Bear said honestly. "They're going to attack everything. Your mental health, your competence, your character. They're going to dig up every mistake you ever made, and the media is going to eat it up because billionaire family drama sells. Can we win? Depends on your definition of winning. Legally? Yes, Hartwell's good and we have evidence that'll bury them. But the cost, that's harder to measure. This is going to take years off your life, Jack. It's going to change you. The question is whether you're willing to pay that price. Jack thought about the colonel's letter, about the performance clause, about 24 months to prove himself worthy. He thought about Midnight Ranger fighting for life on an operating table. He thought about Diego and Hank and Amanda and all the people whose livelihoods depended on Willowbrook continuing to exist. I already paid the price, Jack said quietly. In Ramadi, in a dozen other places I can't talk about. I know what sacrifice looks like. This is just a different battlefield. Then you'll do fine, Bear said. Because the one thing your father never understood is that you can't break someone who's already been tested by fire. You came home from war. You survived. This is just cleanup. Jack hoped Bear was right. But as he sat there in the study, surrounded by his grandfather's legacy, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real war was just beginning. And this time, the enemy wore his own face. The next morning, Jack woke to a new reality. The local newspaper had picked up the story, headline blaring across the front page. Veteran inherits billions. Family claims he's unfit. The article was carefully worded, legally safe, but the implication was clear. The accompanying photo showed Jack in his marine dress blues from years ago, juxtaposed with a recent photo of Richard and Catherine looking concerned and parental. Bear found him reading it over coffee on the porch. Don't let it get to you. It's propaganda. It's effective propaganda, Jack said. They're painting me as unstable and them as concerned parents. The narrative's already being written. So we changed the narrative. Bear sat down, his prosthetic leg creaking slightly. You want to fight this in court? Fine, but you also fight it here. You show up, you work. You prove every day that you're exactly who the colonel believed you were. And if that's not enough, then we use the USB drive and we end them, Bear said flatly. But that's the nuclear option. Once you push that button, there's no coming back. Jack understood. As long as there was a chance of resolution, of avoiding total war, they had to try. But he also understood that his father wasn't interested in resolution. Richard Thornton wanted everything, and he was willing to destroy his own son to get it. The war had begun. Jack just had to decide how far he was willing to go to win it. He looked out at Willowbrook, at the ranch awakening to another day, at the legacy his grandfather had built and entrusted to him, and he made his decision, as far as necessary, as far as it took, because some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost, and legacy, real legacy, was one of them. The deposition room in downtown San Luis Obispo smelled like recycled air and expensive cologne. Jack sat across from Eleanor Mercer and her legal team, Hartwell beside him, a court reporter's fingers poised over her machine. Outside the windows, normal people went about their normal lives, unaware that inside this sterile conference room, a family was tearing itself apart with surgical precision. Mercer had the kind of face that belonged in courtrooms, sharp-featured and calculating, her silver hair immaculate, her suit probably worth more than most people made in a month. She opened a folder with the casual confidence of a woman holding all the cards. Captain Thornton, let's begin with your medical discharge. You were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, correct? Partial PTSD, Jack said, keeping his voice level. Not severe, within manageable parameters. Define manageable. Do you experience nightmares? Sometimes. Flashbacks to combat situations? Occasionally. Anger management issues? No. Mercer pulled out a document, slid it across the table. This is a medical report from your unit, dated March 2023. It states you punched a wall in your barracks, resulting in a fractured metacarpal. Would you call that anger management? Jack felt his jaw tighten. He remembered that night, remembered the call that one of his Marines had stepped on an IED, remembered the rage and grief that had nowhere to go except into concrete. I was frustrated after losing a man in my unit. So you have violent tendencies when stressed? Hartwell leaned forward. That's not what he said, and you know it. Grieving a fallen Marine isn't a violent tendency. It's a human response. I'm simply establishing, Mercer continued smoothly, that Captain Thornton has documented psychological issues that may impact his ability to make sound business decisions under pressure. The deposition continued for 6 hours. Mercer probed every aspect of Jack's military service, looking for cracks, for moments of weakness that could be twisted into evidence of instability. She asked about the shrapnel in Jack's shoulder, about pain medication, about whether combat had affected his judgment. Every question was designed to paint a picture of a broken veteran, someone too damaged to handle the responsibility of a billion-dollar estate. Jack answered each question with military discipline, giving nothing away, refusing to be baited. But he could feel the strategy working, could imagine how this would play in court. Young veteran, traumatized, making impulsive decisions like spending $200,000 on emergency surgery for a horse when insurance would have paid out $1 million. When they finally finished, when Jack walked out into the California sunshine, he felt exhausted in a way that combat never made him feel. Fighting an enemy you could see was clean. This was poison. How bad was it? He asked Hartwell on the drive back to Willowbrook. Bad. Hartwell's hands were tight on the steering wheel. Mercer's good at what she does. She's building a narrative of instability. And the media is going to run with it. We need to be ready. Ready for what? For your father to go public. For interviews where he plays the concerned parent. For think pieces about whether PTSD should disqualify someone from managing assets. Hartwell glanced at him. It's going to get uglier before it gets better. That night, Jack found out exactly how ugly. The local news ran a segment featuring Richard and Catherine Thornton sitting in their tastefully decorated living room, looking like the picture of parental concern. We just want what's best for Jack, Richard said, his voice heavy with manufactured emotion. He's been through so much. Combat, injuries, psychological trauma. We're worried that he's being taken advantage of by people who want to control the estate for their own purposes. The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. You're referring to the ranch management? People like Samuel Maddox? I'm saying that Jack is vulnerable right now, Richard replied. And there are people who see that vulnerability as an opportunity. We're his parents. We just want to make sure he's protected. Catherine dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We failed him once, when we let the distance grow between us. We can't fail him again by standing by while he makes decisions that could ruin his life. Jack watched from the colonel's study, Bear standing beside him, both men silent. The performance was masterful. His parents looked reasonable, concerned, loving, and he looked like what? The troubled son who didn't know what he was doing? They're good, Bear said finally. I'll give them that. They're liars, Jack said. Bear nodded. But effective liars. This is going to turn public opinion. People are going to see them as the good parents trying to save their son from himself. Jack's phone buzzed, a text from Diego. Just saw the news. For what it's worth, everyone here knows it's a bullshit. We got your back. Then came another text from Hank. The horses don't care about your PTSD. They care if you show up and do the work. Keep showing up. More texts followed from ranch hands, from Amanda Chen, from board members. A wall of support that meant more than Jack could articulate. These people had seen him work, had seen him make hard decisions, had seen him choose the ranch over the easy path. They knew who he was in a way his parents never had. But public perception was a different beast, and Richard and Catherine were feeding it carefully crafted lies. The real blow came the next morning. Jack was in the training arena working with a young mare when his phone rang. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. Mr. Thornton, this is Sarah Chen from Western Horseman magazine. I'm doing a story about the situation at Willowbrook Ranch, and I was hoping to get your comment on some allegations that have surfaced. What kind of allegations? Jack kept his voice neutral, one hand on the mare's neck, feeling her steady heartbeat. We've received anonymous information suggesting that Willowbrook has been falsifying pedigree records. Specifically that 6 horses currently registered may have questionable lineage. Would you care to comment? Jack felt ice in his veins. That's absolutely false. Every horse at Willowbrook has documented, verified bloodlines going back generations. The source seems quite confident. They've provided documentation that they claim shows discrepancies in registration papers. Who's the source? I can't reveal that, but they appear to have intimate knowledge of the operation. The reporter paused. Mr. Thornton, if these allegations are true, it could destroy not just Willowbrook's reputation, but damage the entire American breeding industry. Then it's fortunate they're not true. Jack's mind was racing, trying to understand the angle. We'll cooperate fully with any investigation. In fact, I'll personally fund independent DNA testing on every horse in our facility. Complete transparency. That's a bold move. Testing 180 horses will cost close to $500,000. Then that's what it costs. Because unlike whoever is making these accusations, I actually care about the integrity of this industry. After the call ended, Jack stood in the arena, the mayor nosing at his shoulder, and tried to think through the chess game. Falsifying pedigrees was the kind of scandal that could destroy Willowbrook's reputation permanently. Even if proven false, the stain would remain. Buyers would hesitate. Breeding contracts would be canceled. The ranch could survive financially, but the damage to everything his grandfather built would be catastrophic. Someone was trying to destroy not just Jack's inheritance, but the Colonel's life work. He called an emergency meeting. Bear, Hartwell, Amanda, Hank, Dr. Webb, and the key board members assembled in the conference room within an hour. Jack explained the situation, watching their faces shift from confusion to anger. "This is Wade Blackwood," Hank said immediately. "Has to be. He's been trying to undercut Willowbrook for 20 years. Wade Blackwood owned the second largest breeding operation in California, a flasher outfit built on aggressive marketing and questionable practices. The Colonel and Blackwood had been business partners briefly in the 90s before a bitter split over ethical disagreements. Since then, Blackwood had been a constant thorn, trying to poach staff, spreading rumors, undercutting prices. "If it's Blackwood, we need proof," Hartwell said. "Accusations won't hold up in court." Jack thought about the USB drive, about the Colonel's decades of documentation. Did Grandpa have anything on Blackwood? Bear and Hartwell exchanged a look. "He might have," Bear said slowly. "There's an encrypted folder on that drive we haven't opened yet. The Colonel said it was insurance, to be used only if absolutely necessary." "This qualifies as absolutely necessary," Jack said. "Open it." Hartwell pulled out his laptop, accessed the USB drive, and found the encrypted folder. The password was the Colonel's military service number. Inside were dozens of files meticulously organized, each one labeled with dates and descriptions. "Project Long Game," the main folder was titled. Jack leaned over Hartwell's shoulder as they opened the files. What he saw made his blood run cold and his mind sharp with understanding. The Colonel had been tracking Wade Blackwood for over 20 years. Bank records, registration documents, witness statements, photographs, evidence of systematic fraud. Blackwood had falsified pedigrees on at least 4 horses between 2015 and 2020, creating fake documentation to boost sale prices. He'd inflated insurance claims on 2 stallions, faking injuries to collect payouts. And most damning, he'd bribed a registry official to alter bloodline records, paying $50,000 for documents that let him register horses with champion genetics they didn't actually possess. "Why didn't the Colonel use this?" Jack asked. "This would have destroyed Blackwood years ago." Bear's voice was quiet. "Because using it would have damaged the entire industry. If this got out, it wouldn't just take down Blackwood. It would make buyers worldwide question every American pedigree. Your grandfather chose to protect the industry over destroying his enemy. So he just let Blackwood keep operating?" "He contained him," Hartwell said. "Made sure Blackwood couldn't do too much damage. But he also documented everything, waiting for the day when using it would be necessary. He left a note here." Hartwell clicked on a text file. The Colonel's words appeared on screen. "Jack, if you're reading this, Blackwood has made a move that threatens not just Willowbrook, but the integrity you'll need to maintain to run this operation. You have a choice. You can use this evidence to destroy him, but understand that going public will hurt everyone. Or you can use it as leverage, quietly force him out, and protect the industry your grandfather helped build. The Marine in you will want the nuclear option. The rancher in you needs to think long-term. Choose wisely. Remember, being worthy of what you're given means more than winning battles." The room was silent. Jack read the note 3 times, feeling the weight of the decision. He could expose Blackwood, prove the allegations against Willowbrook were false by showing Blackwood was the actual fraud. It would be satisfying, righteous even. But it would also damage every legitimate breeder in America, would make international buyers hesitant, would harm innocent people who'd done nothing wrong. The Marine in him wanted blood. The man his grandfather had believed in knew there was a better way. "I need to talk to Blackwood," Jack said. "Privately. Set it up." 2 days later, Jack sat across from Wade Blackwood at a restaurant in San Francisco, neutral ground, expensive enough to ensure privacy. Blackwood was 52, well-dressed, confident in the way successful men often were. He smiled as Jack sat down, a shark's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Jack Thornton, I've heard a lot about you. Marine hero returned to save the family ranch. Very dramatic. Cut the bullshit, Jack said. I know you're behind the pedigree allegations. I know you fed that story to Western Horsemen. And I know why. Blackwood's smile didn't waver. Do you? Enlighten me. You want me distracted. You want Willowbrook's reputation damaged. And you probably figured a combat veteran with PTSD would be easy to rattle. Jack leaned forward. You figured wrong. Bold words from someone facing a major scandal. Jack pulled out a tablet, opened a file, and turned it toward Blackwood. The older man's smile finally faltered as he saw the documentation. Bank transfers, registration forms with visible alterations, photos of Blackwood meeting with the registry official, a paper trail 20 years deep. Your grandfather was a paranoid old man, Blackwood said, but his voice had lost its confidence. My grandfather was thorough, and he left me everything I need to destroy you. Jack let that sink in. I can release this. I can send it to every breeder association in the country. I can make sure you never work in this industry again. Hell, I can probably get you charged criminally. Blackwood's face had gone pale. What do you want? A public retraction. A statement saying the allegations against Willowbrook were based on false information. Your word that you never contact us again. Jack paused. And you need to understand something. I'm not my grandfather. I don't have 50 years of patience. You come at me again, at my people, at my ranch, and I won't play nice. I'll burn you to the ground. And the evidence? I keep it. Insurance, you stay clean, it stays buried. You step out of line, it goes public. Simple. Blackwood sat back, his jaw working. You know what your grandfather told me once? He said I'd never understand the difference between building something and just taking credit for it. I laughed at him, called him an old fool stuck in the past. He was right, Jack said. Yeah, Blackwood's voice was bitter. He was. You'll have your retraction by tomorrow. And Jack, for what it's worth, your grandfather would be proud. You could have destroyed me. You chose the harder path. The harder path was the right path. After Blackwood left, Jack sat alone in the restaurant, feeling the adrenaline drain away. He'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a narrow escape from disaster. And the war with his father was still raging. His phone rang. Hartwell. Good news and bad news, the attorney said. Good news, Western Horsemen just received a retraction from their anonymous source. They're killing the story. Bad news, your father just filed a motion to have you removed as executor immediately. Citing the scandal as evidence you're damaging the estate. Emergency hearing tomorrow. Jack closed his eyes. Of course. One fire put out, another one starting. That's how wars worked. You didn't win them in single battles. You ground through them, day after day, until one side couldn't continue. I'll be there, Jack said. The courtroom was packed. Media, interested parties, people from the breeding community who'd heard about the scandal and the retraction. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table with Hartwell, while across the aisle, Richard and Catherine sat with Eleanor Mercer, looking grave and concerned. Judge Patricia Morrison was 68, a no-nonsense former prosecutor who had seen every trick in the book. She read through the motions with careful attention, then looked up at both parties. Ms. Mercer, you're asking me to remove Jack Thornton as executor based on alleged mismanagement and the recent scandal regarding pedigree falsification. Mr. Hartwell, you're arguing that the scandal was fabricated by a business rival and has been retracted. Is that a fair summary? It is, Your Honor, both attorneys said in unison. Then let's hear it. Ms. Mercer, make your case. Mercer stood, and Jack had to admire her skill. The attorney laid out a narrative of a young man traumatized by war, thrust into a position beyond his capabilities, making questionable decisions that endangered a billion-dollar operation. The expensive surgery for Midnight Ranger, when insurance would have covered the loss. The scandal, even though retracted, showing poor judgment in who to trust. The fact that Jack had been gone for 10 years and returned only because of inheritance. It was effective. Jack could see the judge listening carefully, could see doubt in her expression. Your Honor, Mercer concluded, we're not questioning Mr. Thornton's character or his service to this country. We're simply asking whether someone with no business experience, documented PTSD, and a history of making emotional rather than financial decisions should be managing an estate of this magnitude. His parents, who have business experience, who knew Robert Thornton intimately, are willing to take on this burden to protect both the estate and their son. Hartwell rose, and Jack saw why the colonel had trusted this man. Where Mercer had been smooth, Hartwell was direct. Where Mercer had built a narrative, Hartwell presented facts. Your Honor, my client has been managing Willowbrook Ranch for exactly 3 months. In that time, net profits are on track to meet or exceed projections. Staff retention is 100%. Every breeding contract has been honored. Every financial obligation has been met. The surgery for Midnight Ranger, which Ms. Mercer characterizes as emotional decision-making, was actually sound business strategy. That horse is now recovering and will generate an estimated $10 million over his lifetime, 10 times the insurance payout. Hartwell pulled out documents. As for the scandal, my client immediately offered to fund independent DNA testing on every animal in the facility. Complete transparency. The kind of response that shows confidence, not guilt. And the retraction proves the allegations were false. What about the PTSD diagnosis? Judge Morrison asked. Captain Thornton has provided medical documentation that his condition is mild and well managed. He's also provided testimonials from military superiors, from ranch management, from board members, all attesting to his competence. PTSD is not a legal basis for removing someone from inheritance, Your Honor. If it were, we'd be discriminating against millions of veterans. The judge considered this. Ms. Mercer, do you have evidence of actual mismanagement, actual financial loss, actual incompetence beyond what you've presented? Mercer hesitated just for a moment. Your Honor, we believe the pattern of behavior suggests pattern of behavior isn't evidence. Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. Do you have concrete proof that Jack Thornton has damaged this estate? Not yet, Your Honor. But given time, every decision can be second-guessed. The judge closed the folder. Here's my ruling. Mr. Thornton remains as executor. However, I'm ordering quarterly financial reviews for the next year. If at any point the estate's performance drops significantly, we'll revisit this. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, you have the right to continue your legal challenge to the will itself, but your son is not being removed from management. Richard shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is— Sit down, Mr. Thornton. The judge's voice cut like a blade. I've read the depositions. I've reviewed the medical records. I've examined the evidence. Your son is doing the job he inherited. If you want to prove he's unfit, you need more than speculation and concern. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down and Jack felt something unknot in his chest. Not victory, not yet, but survival. One more battle won in a war that seemed endless. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Jack pushed through them, Hartwell running interference. But one question cut through the noise. Mr. Thornton, do you have a message for your parents? Jack stopped, turned, looked directly at the camera. My grandfather built something that mattered, something that employed 120 people, that contributed to an industry, that represented 50 years of dedication and excellence. I'm going to protect that. Not because of money, because it's worth protecting. What about your relationship with your father? Jack thought about the recordings, about Richard hoping the colonel would die soon, about the bribed doctors and the calculated cruelty. He thought about what he could say, the damage he could do with just a few words. But he thought about the colonel too, about choosing the harder path, about earning what you're given. My father made his choices. I'm making mine. That's all I have to say. He walked away, feeling the weight of cameras following him, knowing this would be on the evening news, knowing the narrative was still being written. But for the first time since coming home, he felt like he was writing it instead of just reacting to it. That night, back at Willowbrook, Jack found the entire ranch staff gathered at the main house. Someone had set up a barbecue, music played from portable speakers, and people were celebrating like they'd won something significant. Diego saw him and raised a beer. To the boss, who doesn't quit even when he should? Cheers went up, and Jack felt emotion well up that he hadn't let himself feel in the courtroom. These people believed in him. They'd stood with him when it would have been easier to hedge their bets, to wait and see who would win before committing. Bear found him on the porch, away from the party, looking out at the dark pastures. You did good today. We survived. That's different from winning. Sometimes survival is winning. Bear settled into the chair beside him. Your grandfather used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he does when he's winning. It's what he does when everything's falling apart, and he keeps going anyway. Everything is falling apart, Jack said quietly. The legal fees are mounting. The board's nervous. My father's not going to stop, and I'm not sure I'm the right person for this. The horses don't care if you're the right person. Bear's voice was matter of fact. They care if you show up, if you make good decisions, if you put their welfare first. You've done that. The people here don't care if you have doubts. They care if you fight for them. You've done that too. Jack was quiet for a long moment, listening to the party behind them, the laughter and music, the sound of people who believed they had something worth celebrating. Then what do I care about? That's the question, isn't it? Bear looked at him. You care about being worthy of what you were given. You care about not letting your grandfather down. You care about proving your father wrong. Those are all external measures. The question is, what do you care about for yourself? Jack thought about Ramadi, about standing in rubble with his Marines, about making decisions in split seconds that determined who lived and died. He thought about coming home to nothing, no mission, no purpose, just discharge papers and a medical diagnosis. He thought about seeing Willowbrook for the first time in 10 years, about the weight settling on his shoulders. I care about building something that lasts, he said finally. Not for me, for the people who depend on it, for the horse who deserve better than being treated like commodities, for the idea that excellence matters, that patience pays off, that doing things right is more important than doing things fast. Then that's your answer. Bear stood, his prosthetic leg clicking softly. That's why you'll win. Not because you're perfect, because you understand what you're fighting for. The party continued into the night, but Jack sat on the porch for hours after everyone had gone home, thinking about the war ahead, about his father's next move, about the quarterly reviews that would scrutinize every decision. The legal battle was far from over. The challenge to the will would continue. The media would keep asking questions. But for tonight, in this moment, Jack Thornton felt something he hadn't felt since before Ramadi. He felt like he belonged somewhere, like he was building something instead of just surviving. Like the last 10 years of running and fighting and bleeding had finally led him somewhere that mattered. Willowbrook Ranch was home, not because he'd inherited it, but because he'd chosen it. Every day, in every decision, in every moment, he could have walked away and didn't. That choice, repeated daily, was what his grandfather had tried to teach him. Not the weight you carried, but how you carried it. The stars wheeled overhead, California stars in a clear sky, and somewhere in the darkness, the horses slept peacefully, unaware of the wars being fought over their ownership, knowing only that they were fed and cared for and safe. That was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough. 6 months had passed since the courtroom victory, and Jack Thornton had learned that winning a battle didn't mean the war was over. It just meant the enemy adjusted their strategy. The quarterly financial review sat on his desk like a loaded weapon, numbers that told a story of razor-thin margins and impossible decisions. Midnight Ranger's recovery was ahead of schedule, but his absence from breeding rotation had cost them exactly $1.3 million in revenue. Legal fees had consumed another $800,000. The performance benchmarks in the colonel's will felt less like guidelines and more like tripwires. Jack stood at the window of the ranch office, watching morning light paint the training paddock gold, watching Hank work with a 3-year-old filly that moved like poetry. This was what the numbers couldn't capture. The excellence being built one horse at a time, continuing what his grandfather had started. But courts and lawyers and his father didn't care about poetry. They cared about profit margins and balance sheets and whether Jack Thornton was competent enough to deserve what he'd inherited. His phone rang. Philip Hartwell, calling early, which never meant good news. "Tell me," Jack said. "Your father's changed tactics." Hartwell's voice was tense. "He's dropped the incompetency angle. Now he's claiming undue influence. Says the colonel was manipulated by Bear and the staff into cutting out his own son. Says the will was written under duress. That's ridiculous. We have medical records proving Grandpa was sound. Doesn't matter. It's a new legal theory, which means new motions, new hearings, new expenses. And Jack, there's something else. They've subpoenaed the ranch's financial records going back 20 years. They're looking for something, anything they can use. Let them look. We've got nothing to hide. I know. But it's going to be invasive. They'll dig through every transaction, every decision your grandfather made. They're hoping to find something questionable, some mistake they can amplify." Jack felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the stress that never quite went away anymore. "How much is this going to cost?" "Another $200,000, minimum. And that's if we win quickly." Hartwell paused. "Jack, I need to ask, how are the ranch finances actually holding up?" The truth was complicated. Revenue was down but stable. Expenses were controlled. They were profitable but barely above the 15 million threshold the will required. One major disaster, one unexpected cost, and they'd slip below the benchmark. One slip, and his father would finally have the ammunition he needed. "We're holding," Jack said. "Barely, but we're holding." That might not be enough. The judge ordered quarterly reviews, remember? If the next one shows declining performance, Richard's lawyers will argue you're trending toward failure. They'll push for immediate removal. Then we need to make sure the next review looks better. How? You can't create revenue out of thin air. Jack looked out at Warlord's Pride in the distant paddock, the 7-year-old stallion worth millions. The genetic foundation of everything they'd built. There might be a way. Let me talk to the board. The emergency board meeting convened that afternoon. Harold Cross, Amanda Chen, Bear, Hank, and the other board members gathered around the conference table with the grim expressions of people who knew hard decisions were coming. Jack laid out the situation with military directness. "We're profitable, but not by enough margin. Legal costs are eating into our cushion. The next quarterly review needs to show strength, not weakness. We need to consider options we haven't explored yet." "What kind of options?" Harold asked. Amanda pulled up a spreadsheet. "We've had 3 major offers in the past month, all rejected per standard policy. But maybe it's time to reconsider." The first offer appeared on screen. A breeding contract from a Kentucky operation, Meadowbrook Farms, proposing a partnership arrangement. They wanted to share genetics, co-own offspring, split profits, projected revenue over 5 years, 30 million. "That's a good deal," Harold said. "Reputable operation, solid financials." "It's also giving away half our genetic advantage," Hank countered. "We spend 50 years building these bloodlines. Now we just share them." The second offer was from a Dubai buyer, Sheikh Rashid Al Nahyan, wanting to purchase breeding rights to Warlord's Pride for the Middle Eastern market, 22 million paid up front. "That's 7 times his current market value," one of the board members said. "We'd be idiots not to take it. Or we'd be idiots to give up our crown jewel for a quick payout," Bear said. "Warlord's Pride generates 15 million a year in stud fees alone. Over his remaining breeding life, he's worth triple what they're offering." The third offer made Jack's stomach clench. Wade Blackwood, despite everything, had submitted a proposal through intermediaries. He wanted to buy 6 of Willowbrook's younger stallions, the next generation being developed. Total offer, 8 million. "That's Blackwood." Hank's voice went cold. "Absolutely not. He's offering above market value," Amanda said quietly. "And legally, we can't discriminate based on personal history." "The hell we can't," Bear said. "That man tried to destroy us 3 months ago." Jack listened to the debate, feeling the weight of command, the burden of decision-making when there were no good options. The Marine in him wanted to reject everything out of pride, to prove they could survive on their own terms. But the rancher in him, the part that was learning to think in decades instead of deployments, understood that sometimes the right move looked like compromise. "What's your professional recommendation?" Jack asked Amanda. She met his eyes steadily. "The Kentucky partnership is the smartest long-term play. It expands our market, reduces risk, and brings in consistent revenue. The Dubai offer is tempting, but short-sighted. We'd regret it in 5 years. The Blackwood offer," she paused. "It pains me to say this, but it's actually fair value. And selling those 6 horses would give us cash cushion for legal fees without touching our core breeding operation." Jack stood, walked to the window, looked out at the ranch that was becoming his identity as much as the Marines had been. Every decision here had consequences that rippled through decades. Sell to Blackwood, and he'd be compromising with the enemy. Reject everything, and he'd be gambling with what his grandfather built out of stubbornness. "What would the colonel have done?" he asked Bear. The old man was quiet for a moment. He'd have taken the Kentucky deal. He'd have rejected Dubai, and he'd have told Blackwood to go to hell, even if it cost him money. Bear's voice was steady. "But you're not the colonel. You're Jack Thornton. You've got to make your own decisions." Jack turned back to the board. "We take the Kentucky partnership. It's the right long-term move. We reject Dubai. Warlord's Pride stays here. And Blackwood," Jack paused, feeling every eye on him. "We counteroffer 6 horses for 10 million, and he signs a non-compete agreement that keeps him out of California breeding for 5 years. "That's a hell of a markup," Harold said. "He'll never go for it." Then he doesn't want the horses that badly. Jack's voice was firm. But if he does agree, it means we get cash cushion and we reduce his ability to compete with us. Win-win. The board voted. The Kentucky partnership passed unanimously. The Blackwood counteroffer passed 6-2, and Jack felt the first stirrings of something that might have been confidence. He was learning to play this game. Slowly, expensively, but learning. The response from Blackwood came faster than expected. A personal call to Jack's cell phone, the older man's voice carrying grudging respect. 10 million and a non-compete? You've got balls, kid. It's called business, Mr. Blackwood. Your grandfather would have told me to fuck off completely. You're more pragmatic. Blackwood paused. I'll agree to your terms on one condition. Personal meeting. Just you and me, no lawyers. Why? Because I want to look you in the eye and make sure you understand what you're doing. They met 3 days later at the same San Francisco restaurant, the same neutral ground where they'd confronted each other over the scandal. But this time, the dynamic had shifted. Jack wasn't the desperate heir anymore. He was the man who'd survived 6 months of warfare and was still standing. Blackwood ordered scotch, expensive and neat. Jack ordered coffee. The older man smiled at that. Don't drink? Not when I'm negotiating. Smart, Blackwood studied him. I've been in this business for 30 years, built my operation from nothing, made my fortune, earned my reputation. And I've spent 20 of those years competing with your grandfather. You know why we hated each other? Because you cut corners and he didn't? Blackwood laughed, a bark of genuine amusement. That's what he told you? No, we hated each other because we were the same. Both stubborn, both convinced we were right, both willing to sacrifice everything for our operations. The difference was methodology, not character. You falsified pedigrees, Jack said flatly. That's not methodology, that's fraud. The smile faded. Yeah, I did. And you know why? Because in 1998, I was going bankrupt. I had a choice, cheat or lose everything. I chose to cheat. Your grandfather had the same choice in 1985. Market crash, drought, he was underwater. You know what he did? Jack waited. He sold half his herd, took 10 years to rebuild, but he did it clean. Blackwood's voice was bitter. I respected him for it, even hated him for it, because he proved it was possible to have integrity and survive. And I proved it was possible to compromise and succeed. We were both right. We were both wrong. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand something. Blackwood leaned forward. The 10 million, the non-compete, I'll agree to all of it. But I'm also going to tell you something your grandfather never knew. Your father came to me 6 months ago, before the scandal, before the legal fights. He wanted me to help him destroy you. Jack felt icy in his veins. What did you tell him? I told him no. Blackwood's eyes were steady, because despite everything, despite our competition and my mistakes, I respected what Willowbrook represented. And I respect what you're trying to do. Your father doesn't want legacy, he wants liquidation. He'd sell everything, take his billions, and let this industry burn. I can't let that happen. This was the moment Jack understood the depth of the chess game being played. His father wasn't just fighting Jack. He was assembling a coalition, trying to turn competitors into allies, looking for any angle to undermine his son's control. And Blackwood, the man who tried to destroy Willowbrook months ago, had refused to help. Why are you on my side now? I'm not on your side. Blackwood's voice was matter of fact. I'm on the industry's side. Willowbrook under your leadership might beat me in business. Willowbrook liquidated by your father would hurt everyone. It's practical, not personal. Jack extended his hand. Then we have a deal. They shook, and Jack felt the strange respect that sometimes existed between competitors who understood each other. This wasn't friendship, it was professional acknowledgement. Two men who'd fight each other in the market, but wouldn't let the market itself be destroyed. Walking out of the restaurant, Jack felt the weight shift slightly. Not lighter, just different. He was accumulating allies, learning the landscape, understanding that survival in this world required both integrity and pragmatism. The Colonel's way wasn't the only way, it was just the foundation to build upon. The Kentucky partnership launched 2 weeks later with a formal signing ceremony at Willowbrook. Media covered it, industry publications ran features, and suddenly the narrative shifted. Jack Thornton wasn't just the troubled heir anymore. He was the innovative leader bringing fresh thinking to traditional breeding. The stories mentioned his military service as an asset now, proof of leadership under pressure, not evidence of instability. His father's legal team tried to paint the partnership as desperation, proof that Jack couldn't manage alone. But the numbers didn't support that narrative. The deal was structured brilliantly, protecting Willowbrook's core assets while opening new revenue streams. Amanda Chen had outdone herself, and the quarterly financial review reflected it. Revenue projections up, expenses controlled, profit margins improving. But Richard Thornton wasn't finished. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to deploy his final weapon. The call came at midnight. Hartwell, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We've got a problem. A big one. Your father's lawyers just filed a motion claiming they have new evidence. Evidence that the colonel was being extorted by Bear Maddox." "What?" Jack was already getting dressed, his mind snapping into combat focus. "That's insane. They claim they have financial records showing Bear received irregular payments from your grandfather over 20 years. Payments that don't match salary or bonuses. They're arguing that Bear was blackmailing Robert, that the will was written to keep Bear happy, not because the colonel actually wanted you to inherit." Jack felt rage flash hot and immediate. Bear was the most honorable man he knew. A Vietnam veteran who'd given his leg for his country, who'd spent 40 years building Willowbrook with absolute loyalty. The idea that he was a blackmailer was so absurd it would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous. "What payments are they talking about?" "I don't know yet. We'll get the documentation tomorrow." "But Jack, this is their play. They can't prove you're incompetent. They can't prove the colonel was senile. So now they're trying to prove the will itself was made under duress. If they can convince a judge that Bear was manipulating your grandfather, they can invalidate the entire inheritance. Meet me at the ranch. 2 hours. We need to go through the colonel's records." They spent the night in the ranch office, Bear included, going through decades of financial documentation. Amanda Chen joined them at 3 in the morning, her laptop connected to accounting servers, running queries through 20 years of transactions. "There," she said finally, highlighting entries on the screen. "Monthly payments to Samuel Maddox, separate from salary, ranging from $500 to $2,000. Started in 1995, continued until the colonel died." Bear's face had gone pale. "I can explain those." "You don't have to," Jack said. "Yes, I do." Bear's voice was rough. "Those payments were for my daughter. She has cerebral palsy. The medical bills are astronomical. The colonel found out about it in 1995 when I was about to quit. Couldn't afford to keep working when I needed better insurance. He set up those payments to go into a medical trust for her. Called it a performance bonus. Made me promise never to tell anyone because he didn't want other staff feeling like they could ask for special treatment." The room was silent. Amanda looked at the entries again, then started pulling up supporting documentation. Medical trust accounts, hospital records, all of it corroborating Bear's story. "Your father's lawyers don't have this context," she said quietly. "They just see irregular payments and drew the worst conclusion. Or they're deliberately misrepresenting it," Hartwell said. "Either way, we can fight this. We have the medical records, the trust documentation. We can prove these payments were charity, not extortion." "But the damage would be done," Jack said. "Even if we prove the truth, the accusation will be out there. People will remember that Bear was accused of blackmail. His reputation will be destroyed." Bear stood, his prosthetic legs scraping against the floor. "Then we don't fight it. I'll resign, remove myself from the operation, take away their ammunition." "Absolutely not," Jack said. "You're not sacrificing yourself for this." "Jack, I'm 62 years old. I've had a good run. If my stepping aside means you keep Willowbrook, it's worth it." "No." Jack's voice carried the command tone that had led Marines through firefights. "We don't abandon our people. We don't let the enemy pick off our team one by one. We fight this together, and we win together." The hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Jack had no intention of waiting. He spent 3 days preparing, working with Hartwell to build not just a defense but a counteroffensive, because he'd learned something in 6 months of warfare. Defense was important, but wars were won on offense. The courtroom was crowded again, the media scenting blood in the water, the breeding community watching to see if Jack Thornton would finally fall. Richard and Catherine sat with Eleanor Mercer, their expressions carrying the confidence of people who believed they'd found the killing blow. Judge Morrison took her seat, read through the new motion with her characteristic thoroughness, then looked at both parties. "Ms. Mercer, you're claiming that Samuel Maddox extorted Robert Thornton over a 20-year period?" We're claiming that irregular payments were made, Your Honor. Payments that suggest an improper relationship that influenced the will's disposition. Mr. Hartwell, your response? We have complete documentation of those payments, Your Honor. They were medical assistance for Mr. Maddox's disabled daughter. Robert Thornton was known for his generosity to employees facing hardship. This wasn't extortion, it was charity. Mercer stood smoothly. Your Honor, regardless of the stated purpose, the fact remains that Mr. Maddox was receiving substantial sums from a man whose will named Mr. Maddox's protege as sole heir. The appearance of impropriety alone is sufficient grounds for concern. Then let's discuss appearances, Hartwell said, and Jack saw the trap being sprung. Let's discuss the appearance of a son who hasn't spoken to his father in years, suddenly showing deep concern for his father's welfare after his death. Let's discuss the appearance of parents who abandoned their son at 18, suddenly claiming they want what's best for him. Your Honor, this is inflammatory, Mercer protested. This is context, Hartwell countered. And since we're discussing evidence, I'd like to enter into the record several audio recordings made by Robert Thornton over the past 5 years. Jack saw his father's face go white, saw Catherine grab Richard's arm, saw Mercer lean over for a hurried conference with her clients. This was the moment, the nuclear option, the point of no return. Hartwell played the first recording, Robert and Richard arguing about the will, then another, Richard demanding money, then the one that made several people in the courtroom gasp. Richard on the phone, not knowing he was being recorded. I talked to that doctor. For $50,000, he'll testify Dad had dementia. We just need him to die soon. Judge Morrison's expression went from neutral to carved granite. Ms. Mercer, did you know your client attempted to bribe medical professionals? Your Honor, that recording is taken out of context. The context, Hartwell said, is that Richard Thornton has spent years trying to manipulate his father's estate. He filed false restraining orders. He spread lies about his father's mental state. He even hoped for his father's death so he could contest the will. And now he's attacking a veteran who dedicated 40 years to Willowbrook because he's run out of other options. The judge looked at Richard and Catherine, her voice cold. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you attempt to bribe medical professionals to provide false testimony about your father's mental state? Richard stood slowly. Your Honor, It was a moment of frustration. I didn't actually follow through. But you considered it. You discussed it. You were willing to commit fraud to overturn your father's will. Judge Morrison closed the folder. I've heard enough. The motion is denied. Furthermore, I'm imposing sanctions on the plaintiffs for bringing frivolous claims. And I'm strongly suggesting that Mr. and Mrs. Thornton reconsider their entire legal strategy before they find themselves facing criminal charges. Your Honor, Mercer started, but the judge cut her off. I'm not finished. I'm also ordering a full accounting of all legal fees and motions filed in this case. If I find evidence of deliberate harassment or abuse of the legal system, I will refer this matter to the state bar. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down like thunder, and Jack felt something break inside him. Not him, them, his parents. Their legal strategy was in ruins. Their reputation was destroyed, and they'd done it to themselves through greed and short-sighted cruelty. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but this time Jack didn't run. He stood on the steps, Hartwell beside him, Bear flanking his other side, and he made a statement. My grandfather built Willowbrook Ranch over 50 years through integrity, hard work, and commitment to excellence. My father tried to tear it down in 6 months through lies, manipulation, and greed. Today, integrity won. I'm grateful to Judge Morrison for seeing through the deception. I'm grateful to my legal team for fighting. And I'm especially grateful to Bear Maddox, a man whose loyalty and honor have been viciously attacked by people who understand neither quality. A reporter called out, "Do you have anything to say to your parents?" Jack looked directly at the camera, knowing Richard and Catherine would be watching. I hope you got what you wanted, because you've certainly lost what mattered. He walked away feeling lighter than he had in months. The war wasn't over. There would be appeals, more motions, more legal maneuvering. But the tide had turned. His father's credibility was destroyed. The recordings were public record now, and Willowbrook was secure. That night, back at the ranch, Jack found Bear on the porch, staring out at the dark pastures. The old man didn't turn as Jack approached. You didn't have to do that, Bear said quietly. Use those recordings. Destroy your relationship with your parents permanently. They destroyed it years ago. I just made it official. Still, there's no going back from this. Jack sat down beside him. Good, because I don't want to go back. I want to move forward, build something better than what came before. Make sure my grandfather's work continues. Bear nodded slowly. You're becoming the man he believed you could be. I'm trying. Jack paused. There's something else. I've been thinking about expanding the veterans program. Maybe hire a coordinator, someone who understands both horses and PTSD, someone who can help more people than just the few we've reached so far. Bear looked at him. You've got someone in mind. There's a kid, Tommy Reeves, 19, Army private, lost his leg in a training accident at Fort Benning. Medical discharge. He contacted me last month, asked if there might be work here. Said he grew up around horses in Montana but couldn't find anyone willing to hire him after the amputation. Sounds familiar, Bear said with a slight smile. I was thinking we bring him on, not just as a worker, as someone we invest in, train him, educate him, make him part of the program. Eventually, he could run the whole veterans therapy operation. The colonel would have loved that idea, Bear said. When does he start? I told him to come out next week. Figure we'll see if he's got what it takes. Bear stood, his prosthetic clicking softly. He'll have what it takes, because you'll make sure of it, just like the colonel made sure I had what it took 40 years ago. They sat in comfortable silence, two veterans watching over a ranch that had become their shared mission. The stars wheeled overhead, California stars in a clear sky, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly. The war with Richard Thornton would continue in diminished form. Appeals would be filed. Legal proceedings would drag on. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. Jack had won not through destroying his enemies, but by building something they couldn't tear down. By earning loyalty instead of demanding it. By making hard decisions with long-term vision instead of short-term greed. Willowbrook Ranch was his now. Not by inheritance alone, but by the sweat and blood and tears he'd poured into it. By the nights he'd stayed up studying bloodlines and balance sheets. By the mornings he'd spent in stables earning the respect of people who measured worth in work, not words. He thought about the colonel's final letter, about being worthy of the name he carried. And for the first time since coming home, Jack Thornton felt like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand what that meant. You didn't just inherit something, you earned it. Every day, through every decision, by choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. And that was a war he was finally winning. 2 years after inheriting Willowbrook Ranch, Jack Thornton stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the main stable, watching a mare named Evening Star labor through her first foaling. Dr. Marcus Webb moved with the calm efficiency of a man who'd delivered hundreds of foals, but Jack never tired of witnessing it. The miracle of new life, the continuation of bloodlines that stretched back centuries, the physical manifestation of everything his grandfather had built. The foal emerged in a rush of fluid and instinct, already struggling to stand on legs that didn't quite work yet, already seeking its mother's warmth. Webb checked the newborn quickly, his hands sure and gentle, then nodded with satisfaction. Healthy colt, good bone structure, excellent conformation. This one's going to be special. Jack felt the tightness in his chest that always came with these moments. 2 years ago, he'd been a Marine captain with PTSD and discharge papers, standing in an attorney's office learning he'd inherited a world he didn't understand. Now he could look at a newborn foal and see potential, could recognize quality in the set of a shoulder or the length of a cannon bone. The knowledge had been earned through hundreds of hours, thousands of questions, countless mistakes corrected by patient teachers. What's the sire, Jack asked, though he already knew. Warlord's pride. Webb smiled. Your decision to keep him instead of taking that Dubai money? This colt's why. He's got champion written all over him. They stood together in the quiet stable, watching the mare nuzzle her foal, watching new life find its footing. Outside, Willowbrook Ranch was awakening to another day. Staff arriving for morning shifts, horses stirring in their stalls, the machinery of a $70 million operation beginning its daily rhythm. But in this moment, in this stall, it wasn't about money or business or legal battles. It was about continuation, about legacy in its purest form. Jack's phone buzzed, a text from Amanda Chen. Quarterly review numbers are in. You need to see this. He found Amanda in the ranch office, spreadsheets glowing on multiple monitors, her expression carrying something Jack had learned to recognize as cautiously optimistic. She turned one of the screens toward him. Year 2 performance, she said. Revenue $78.4 million, up from $62 million when you started. Net profit $24.6 million, up from 18. Staff retention, 97%. Industry reputation, highest it's been in a decade. Jack studied the numbers, feeling something unknot in his chest. The performance clause in the colonel's will had required maintaining $15 million in annual profit. They'd exceeded it by nearly $10 million. The quarterly reviews that had once felt like loaded weapons were now vindication. The Kentucky partnership, he asked, exceeded projections by 18%. The shared genetics program is producing offspring that are commanding premium prices at auction. We've got waiting lists for breeding slots 3 years out. And Midnight Ranger? Amanda's smile widened. Back to full breeding capacity. 30 successful covers this season, all high-dollar contracts. Your decision to save him instead of taking insurance? The lifetime value calculates to approximately $14 million. She paused. Jack, you've not only met the colonel's requirements, you've exceeded them. Willowbrook is more profitable, more respected, and more stable than it's been in 20 years. What about my father's appeals? Dead in the water. Hartwell's already received word that they're withdrawing. Between the sanctions, the criminal investigation threats, and the complete destruction of their credibility, they've got nothing left to fight with. Jack walked to the window, looked out at the ranch that had become his life, his identity, his purpose. 2 years ago, he'd been fighting just to survive, to prove he wasn't the unstable veteran his father painted him as. Now he was building, expanding, innovating. The war with Richard Thornton was over. Not because his father had surrendered, but because he'd been so thoroughly defeated that continuing was pointless. There's something else, Amanda said. The Thornton Challenge Cup. Registration just closed. 57 entries from 12 countries. Prize purse is up to $6 million with the sponsors we've secured. This is going to be the premier endurance race in North America. Jack had proposed the idea a year ago, an annual competition that would elevate American breeding on the world stage. The board had been skeptical, worried about the cost and complexity, but Jack had pushed it through, understanding that legacy wasn't just about maintaining what existed, it was about building something bigger. The race was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and Willowbrook was ready. The course had been surveyed and marked, veterinary stations established every 20 miles, corporate sponsors secured. Media coverage would be international. It was a statement that American breeding operations could compete with anyone in the world. How many Willowbrook horses are entered? Jack asked. 3. We're not stacking the deck. We're proving we can compete openly and win on merit. That was the philosophy Jack had established. Transparency, fair competition, letting excellence speak for itself. It was the colonel's way, updated for a new generation, and it was working. The following week, Jack received an unexpected visitor. Wade Blackwood arrived at the ranch gate in a modest pickup truck, not the flashy Mercedes he used to drive. The man who'd once tried to destroy Willowbrook through scandal and sabotage now requested a meeting with hat in hand. They met in the colonel's study, Jack behind the massive oak desk, Blackwood in the visitor's chair. The power dynamic had shifted completely from their previous encounters. I'll keep this brief, Blackwood said. I'm selling my operation. Moving to Montana, going to run a small training facility. Nothing competitive, just enough to stay in the industry and teach young trainers. He met Jack's eyes. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Why are you selling? Because I'm 54 years old and I'm tired. Tired of cutting corners. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of being the guy everyone knows cheated his way to success. Blackwood's voice was matter of fact. You and your grandfather, you proved it was possible to succeed with integrity. I proved it was possible to succeed without it. But success without integrity is just exhausting. What do you want from me? Nothing. Blackwood shook his head. I just wanted to say that what you've built here in 2 years is remarkable. You took everything your grandfather created and made it better. You didn't just preserve legacy, you expanded it. That takes a kind of courage I never had. Jack studied the older man, seeing genuine respect where there'd once been calculation and contempt. Blackwood wasn't looking for forgiveness or partnership. He was looking for closure, the kind that came from acknowledging defeat not with bitterness, but with hard-earned wisdom. Where in Montana? Jack asked. Small town called Whitehall. About 40 acres, enough for maybe 20 horses. I'm going to focus on teaching, especially veterans. Figure if I can't fix my own mistakes, maybe I can help others avoid them. Jack thought about the scholarship program he'd started at Willowbrook, the 15 foster kids currently in residence learning ranching and business. He thought about the equine therapy program for veterans that had treated over 200 men and women in the past year. He thought about Tommy Reeves, the 19-year-old former Army private who'd lost his leg and found purpose working as assistant trainer. If you need any help setting it up, Jack said, let me know. Resources, contacts, whatever you need. Blackwood's eyebrows rose. You'd help me? After everything? After everything, I learned that destroying enemies is easy. Building something better is hard. If you're trying to build something better, that's worth supporting. They shook hands and Blackwood left. Done. Jack watched him drive away, understanding that this too was part of legacy. Knowing when to show mercy, when to extend a hand, when to let old rivalries die out in favor of future possibilities. The colonel had taught him to compete with excellence. The Marines had taught him to fight with honor. But the past 2 years had taught him that sometimes the strongest move was generosity. The night before the Thornton Challenge Cup, Jack found Bear on the porch, same spot where they'd sat dozens of times over the past 2 years, watching the sun set over California hills. The old man had aged but remained unbreakable. Still first one at the stables every morning. Still the steady presence that held Willowbrook together. Tomorrow's a big day, Bear said. Biggest we've had. Jack settled into the chair beside him. Lot of money, lot of reputation riding on this. Your grandfather would have loved it. Bear's voice was soft with memory. He always said that excellence should be tested, not protected. That's why he never avoided competition. He knew Willowbrook horses could win on merit. What if they don't? What if we come in 10th, 20th? Then we learn from it and come back stronger next year. That's how you build legacy. Not by never failing, but by how you respond to failure. They sat in comfortable silence. Two veterans who'd found purpose in preservation and growth, who'd fought different wars but shared the same values. The ranch spread out before them in the fading light, pastures and stables, in the physical manifestation of 58 years of dedication. You're not just maintaining what the colonel built anymore, Bear said. You're creating your own legacy now. The scholarship program, the veterans therapy program, this race, the partnerships, that's all you. Built on his foundation, Jack said. The best foundations are meant to be built upon. Bear turned to look at him. When you first got here, you were running from something. Now you're running towards something. That's the difference between existing and living. Race day dawned clear and perfect. California sunshine painting the hills gold. Temperature in the 70s. Minimal wind. 57 horses from 12 countries assembled at the starting line. Their riders a mix of professional jockeys and owner-operators, all hungry for the $6 million purse and the prestige of winning the inaugural Thornton Challenge Cup. Jack stood with the race officials, watching the preparations, feeling the electricity of competition in the air. Media trucks lined the route, camera crews positioned at key locations, international streaming services broadcasting to millions. This was American breeding on display, a statement that quality could be produced anywhere but excellence still required the kind of patient dedication Willowbrook represented. The 3 Willowbrook entries were spread through the field. Desert Wind, a 6-year-old mare by Warlord's Pride. Midnight's Return, the recovered stallion's first offspring to race competitively. And Thunder's Promise, a long-shot 4-year-old that Hank had personally trained. Jack had made it clear to the riders, compete fairly, no special treatment, win or lose on merit. The starting gun fired and 57 horses surged forward, beginning the 100-mile course through California's coastal mountains. Jack watched from the command center, monitors showing progress at multiple checkpoints, veterinary teams reporting on horse condition, real-time data flowing from dozens of sources. At checkpoint 1, 20 miles in, Desert Wind was running 3rd, Midnight's Return was 11th, Thunder's Promise was 28th. All 3 Willowbrook horses passed veterinary inspection with flying colors, heart rates good, hydration optimal, no signs of stress. By checkpoint 2, 40 miles, the field had spread significantly. Desert Wind had moved up to 2nd place, pushing the leader, a French thoroughbred named Mystique. Midnight's Return had dropped to 15th, riding smart, conserving energy. Thunder's Promise had moved up to 20th through technical terrain that favored his training. Jack's phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory texts from board members, from competitors, from industry observers. But he couldn't celebrate yet. Endurance racing was about consistency over distance, about horses that could maintain performance for hours. The real test came in the final 40 miles when accumulated fatigue separated champions from pretenders. At checkpoint 3, 60 miles, disaster struck. Desert Wind pulled up lame, a strained tendon visible to the veterinary team. She was immediately withdrawn, loaded into a transport, and taken back to Willowbrook's facilities. Jack felt the disappointment like a physical blow, but also pride. They'd withdrawn her the moment injury was detected, prioritizing the horse over the competition. That was Willowbrook's way. Midnight's Return was now ninth and climbing steadily, the stallion showing the endurance genetics his bloodline was famous for. Thunder's Promise had cracked the top 15, running with heart that exceeded his physical advantages. The final 20 miles separated everyone. Horses that had looked strong at 60 miles began to fade. Riders made tactical errors, pushing too hard or holding back too much. The course wound through challenging terrain where footing mattered, where intelligence mattered as much as speed. With 5 miles remaining, Midnight's Return had moved into third place, chasing two international competitors who'd been favorites from the start. The stallion's recovery from colic surgery 18 months ago had proven complete. He was running with power and confidence, eating up ground with every stride. At 3 miles, he overtook second place, a German warmblood that had dominated European endurance racing. Now it was Midnight's Return chasing Mystique, the French favorite, with 1 mile separating victory from defeat. Jack watched the monitor, barely breathing, as the two horses thundered toward the finish line. Mystique was a proven champion with a rider who knew every trick. But Midnight's Return had something else. He had genetics forged through 50 years of selective breeding. He had training from Hank Cordova, and he had the heart that came from being saved when insurance would have been easier. The final quarter mile was pure will against will. Mystique's rider used the whip, asking for everything the horse had left. Midnight's Return's rider sat quiet, letting the stallion find his own pace, trusting the animal's instinct and training. They crossed the finish line together, so close the judges had to review footage for 3 minutes before declaring a winner. Midnight's Return by a nose. The crowd erupted. Jack found himself surrounded by board members, staff, media, everyone wanting to celebrate. But he pushed through them, heading to where Midnight's Return stood, steam rising from his coat, sides heaving with exertion, but eyes bright with triumph. The stallion had proven what the colonel had always believed, that excellence bred true, that patient development paid off, that doing things right mattered more than doing things fast. Hank appeared beside Jack, tears running down the old trainer's weathered face. The colonel's watching this. I guarantee it. Jack put a hand on Midnight's Return, feeling the horse's powerful heartbeat, feeling the connection to his grandfather's legacy, feeling the weight and wonder of everything that had brought him to this moment. That evening, after the award ceremony, after the media interviews, after the celebration, Jack returned to the colonel's study. He sat at the massive oak desk and opened the leather journal he had been keeping for 2 years, continuing the tradition his grandfather had maintained for 5 decades. He wrote about the race, about Desert Wind's injury, and Midnight's Return's victory, about the 2 years since inheriting Willowbrook. But mostly he wrote about what he'd learned. Legacy isn't about money, Jack wrote in careful script. It's not about land or horses or billion-dollar valuations. Legacy is about the choices you make when no one's watching. It's about an integrity when corruption would be easier. It's about building when destroying would be faster. It's about taking care of people who depend on you, even when it costs you something. 2 years ago, I inherited a ranch, but in the process of learning to run it, I inherited something more important. I inherited the understanding that what we build matters, how we build it matters, and who we build it for matters most of all. The scholarship program now had 24 kids in residence. The Veterans Therapy Program had expanded to 3 facilities across California. The breeding operation was more profitable than ever, but profit had become a tool for impact rather than an end in itself. Tommy Reeves had been promoted to head of the Veterans Program, the 19-year-old who'd arrived broken and was now helping others heal. Sienna Hayes, a foster kid who'd aged out of the system, was now studying veterinary medicine at UC Davis on a Willowbrook scholarship while working part-time at the ranch. Diego had been promoted to training director, the immigrant who'd started as a ranch hand now leading a team of 20. These were the real measures of success, not the balance sheet, though that mattered, not the trophy from today's race. though that was meaningful. The real success was in lives changed, futures opened, possibilities created. A knock on the study door. Bear entered, carrying 2 glasses of the Colonel's Reserve bourbon. He handed one to Jack and raised the other. To Robert Thornton, who built the foundation. To everyone who's building on it, Jack replied. They drank, and Jack felt the burn of good whiskey and the warmth of earned respect. Bear settled into the chair across the desk, the same chair he'd sat in countless times over 40 years. First with the Colonel and now with Jack. Got something for you, Bear said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Found it in the Colonel's things. It's dated to be opened on the 2nd anniversary of his death. That's today. Jack took the envelope with the hands that trembled slightly. His grandfather had been dead for 2 years, but his presence was still felt daily in every corner of Willowbrook. Jack opened the envelope carefully, unfolding paper that bore the Colonel's distinctive handwriting. Jack, if you're reading this, you made it. 2 years of challenges, legal battles, difficult decisions, and you're still standing. I'm proud of you, though by now I hope you don't need my pride anymore. I hope you found your own pride in what you've built. You've probably noticed that everything I put in your path was designed to test you. The performance clause wasn't about the money. It was about forcing you to engage, to commit, to invest yourself fully instead of just coasting on inheritance. The quarterly reviews weren't about micromanagement. They were about teaching you to think strategically, to plan ahead, to understand that legacy is built in quarters and years and decades, not in moments. Your father will have fought you every step. I'm sorry for that, but I knew he would. He had to be the fire that forged you into something stronger. Without opposition, without challenge, inheritance is just wealth. With opposition, it becomes character. By now, you've made decisions I wouldn't have made. You've taken Willowbrook in directions I couldn't imagine. That's perfect. That's exactly what should happen. Legacy isn't about replication. It's about evolution. Take what I built and make it better. Take the foundation and build something I never could have conceived. Remember that you're not just managing a ranch. You're stewarding a responsibility to excellence, to integrity, to the people who depend on you, and to the generations who will come after. Every decision you make ripples forward in ways you can't predict. Choose wisely, choose with courage, and never ever compromise on what matters to protect what's convenient. I didn't leave you, Willowbrook, because you were my grandson. I left it to you because you were the only person in the family who understood sacrifice, who understood commitment, who understood that some things are worth bleeding for. The Marines taught you that. Now the ranch has given you something to apply those lessons to. Build something worthy of the name Thornton, not my name, yours. With pride and love, Colonel Robert Thornton. Jack read the letter 3 times, feeling his grandfather's voice in every word, feeling the weight of expectation and the freedom of trust. The Colonel had believed in him when he'd barely believed in himself, had seen potential when all Jack saw was discharge papers and psychological diagnoses and a future without purpose. Bear was watching him steadily. What's it say? That I'm not maintaining his legacy anymore. I'm building my own. That's what he always wanted. Bear stood, his prosthetic legs scraping softly. Get some rest. Tomorrow we've got a ranch to run, kids to teach, veterans to help, and horses to breed. Legacy doesn't maintain itself. After Bear left, Jack walked through the darkened ranch, past stables where million-dollar horses slept, past the scholarship dorms where foster kids dreamed of futures they'd never imagined before Willowbrook, past the therapy center where veterans found healing through working with animals that asked nothing but presence and commitment. He ended up at the paddock where Warlord's Pride grazed in moonlight, the 7-year-old stallion who'd sired today's winner, who'd almost been sold to Dubai for quick money, who represented the core decision that had defined Jack's tenure. Keep the crown jewel or take the payout, build for legacy or optimize for profit. Jack had chosen legacy, and that choice had rippled through everything that followed. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He opened it carefully, half expecting more legal threats from his father's attorneys. But it wasn't from lawyers. It was from Richard Thornton directly. I watched the race today, saw what you've built. Your mother and I are moving to Arizona, selling the house, starting over. We won't bother you anymore. For what it's worth, your grandfather chose better than I deserved. Good luck, Jack. Jack read the message 3 times, feeling something close to pity. His father was 56 years old, starting over with nothing but money from selling assets, No legacy, no relationships, no purpose beyond existing comfortably. Richard had spent 2 years fighting for a fortune and lost everything that actually mattered in the process. Jack could have replied, could have said something cutting or magnanimous or final, but there was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. So he deleted the message and looked back at Warlord's pride, at the stallion that represented everything his grandfather had built, everything Jack was building, everything future generations would build. Legacy wasn't about winning. It was about what you did with victory. It wasn't about defeating enemies. It was about building something enemies couldn't destroy. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about what you passed forward. Jack Thornton, 28 years old, former Marine captain, inheritor of a ranch he'd earned through sweat and blood and tears, stood in California moonlight and understood finally what the colonel had been trying to teach him. You didn't measure legacy in dollars or acres or horses. You measured it in lives changed, in opportunities created, in young people who found purpose, in veterans who found healing, in horses bred with excellence and treated with respect, in daily choices to do things right even when wrong was easier. That was the inheritance that mattered. Not the ranch itself, but what the ranch made possible. Not the money, but what the money could build. Not the name Thornton, but what that name represented. Honor, integrity, commitment, excellence. The values his grandfather had lived. The values the Marines had reinforced. The values Jack was now passing forward to 24 kids in the scholarship program, to 200 veterans in the therapy program, to 120 staff members who came to work every day knowing they were part of something meaningful. This was legacy, not a perfect, not without mistakes, but built with purpose and maintained with dedication. A foundation that would outlast Jack just as it had outlasted the colonel. Something that would continue long after both of them were gone because it was built on principles that transcended individual lives. Jack walked back to the main house, feeling the California night air cool on his skin, hearing the distant sound of horses, seeing the lights of the ranch buildings glowing against darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to build or destroy, to maintain or innovate, to coast or climb. But tonight, 2 years to the day after inheriting Willowbrook Ranch, Jack Thornton felt something he'd been searching for since Ramadi, since the medical discharge, since standing in that attorney's office, learning his life was about to change forever. He felt home, not just a place, but a purpose, not just ownership, but stewardship, not just inheritance, but responsibility. And that finally was enough. The lights of Willowbrook Ranch burned steady in the California darkness, a beacon of excellence maintained through 2 generations and now entering its third. The horses slept peacefully, the students dreamed of futures, the veterans found rest from memories that haunted them. And somewhere impossibly far and impossibly close, the colonel smiled, proud of the man his grandson had become. Legacy continued. Legacy endured. Legacy was forged one decision at a time, one sunrise at a time, one generation at a time. And Jack Thornton, inheritor of blood and legacy, was finally worthy of both.